My boyfriend celebrated when I failed the bar exam, saying I wasn't smart enough to be a lawyer and should do bookkeeping instead. So I sabotaged him the exact same way. My boyfriend Russell celebrated when I didn't pass the bar exam because he was secretly terrified I'd become more successful than him and leave him behind once I became a lawyer. When I opened the email with my failing score after months of studying 16 hours a day, Russell actually smiled and said this was the best thing that could have happened to us as a couple. He popped champagne he'd apparently been saving and said now we could be equals instead of me becoming some hotshot attorney who'd think she was better than him. He called his mother to share the good news that I'd failed, and she wouldn't have to worry about me taking her son away to some big city for my career. Russell told his friends at the bar that night that I'd bombed the exam and bought rounds to celebrate what he called dodging a bullet, because lawyer wives always divorce their husbands for richer lawyers. He actually made a toast to my failure, saying it proved I wasn't as smart as I thought, and maybe now I'd focus on realistic goals like supporting his plumbing business instead of chasing impossible dreams. When I sat there crying about 3 years of law school potentially wasted, Russell said I was being dramatic about a test that most people failed anyway, and I should be grateful to learn my limits before wasting more time. He said he'd always known law school was too ambitious for someone like me, but he'd let me try so I wouldn't have regrets. He actually said my failure was proof that some people were meant to lead and others were meant to follow, and there was no shame in being a follower. He suggested I use my law school knowledge to do bookkeeping for his plumbing business, since that was more my speed intellectually. Russell had barely graduated high school and worked for his uncle's plumbing company, but suddenly felt qualified to judge my intelligence because of one failed test. He'd spent the entire time I was studying complaining that I was ignoring him and making him feel stupid with all my legal talk. He'd hidden my study materials as pranks and played loud music during my practice tests, saying I needed to learn to focus through distractions. He'd scheduled trips and parties during crucial study weeks, then blamed me for being antisocial when I couldn't attend. The night before the exam, Russell had kept me up until 4 a.m. with a fake emergency about his truck breaking down that turned out to be him forgetting to put gas in it. He'd called me crying about being stranded and needing rescue immediately, even though he was 2 blocks from a gas station. I'd spent 3 hours dealing with his manufactured crisis, instead of getting the sleep I desperately needed for the 8-hour exam. When I confronted Russell about celebrating my failure, he said he was just trying to make me feel better about not being cut out for law, and I should appreciate his honesty. He said most boyfriends would pretend to be supportive while secretly being relieved, but he was brave enough to share his true feelings. That's when I decided Russell needed to experience what it felt like to have someone celebrate his failures. Russell was studying for his master plumber certification, which would let him start his own business instead of working for his uncle forever. He'd been preparing for 6 months and constantly talked about how this would change everything for him. I started sabotaging his studies the same way he'd sabotaged mine, but with more creativity. I'd hide his study guides and say the dog must have moved them. I'd delete his practice test bookmarks and claim computer glitches. I'd schedule family emergencies during his classes that required his immediate attention, but turned out to be minor issues. The night before his certification exam, I had a complete breakdown about imaginary symptoms that required multiple emergency room visits. Russell spent 12 hours in various waiting rooms with me as I described pains that mysteriously disappeared whenever doctors examined me. He never slept and showed up to his exam exhausted and unprepared, exactly as I'd been for the bar exam. When Russell failed his certification exam, I threw a party to celebrate and invited everyone we knew. I ordered the same brand of champagne Russell used when I failed, bought the